I paid for a private villa, but when we arrived, my parents invited all their friends without asking me. I didn't complain, I just sent a message. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. I should have known this trip was a mistake the moment I stepped foot in the villa. I felt it, the shift in the air, the suffocating weight of familiarity. The expensive marble floors, the sea breeze wafting through the open terrace doors, the laughter. It all felt wrong. And then I heard them. I swear, his job is the biggest scam I've ever seen. My father's voice boomed over the chatter. Imagine getting paid a fortune just to sit and click buttons all day. Loud, exaggerated, humiliating laughter. I froze in the doorway. He's always buried in those screens, my mother added, taking a sip of her wine. No wonder he's never had a girlfriend. A man should use his hands for real work. Another wave of laughter erupted in the room, and that's when I saw them. Two strangers. No, not strangers. Friends of my parents. Their colleagues, my uncle, my dad's old work buddies. Men who still believed real work meant lifting something heavy, and anything done on a computer was a joke. They were drinking my whiskey, eating my catered food, relaxing in the villa I paid for. I clenched my jaw. I had spent months planning this trip. It was supposed to be just us, my mother, my father, and me. A way to reconnect, to leave behind the years of distance and subtle disappointment. But of course they had other plans. My mother turned and finally noticed me. Her face lit up. Oh, look who arrived. The tech wizard himself. I forced a smile. Who are all these people? She waved her hand dismissively. Just some friends. Don't be dramatic, honey. Yeah, my father chuckled, clapping one of his friends on the back. You should have seen their faces when we told them you paid for this whole place. They were impressed. Impressed. That was it? An opportunity to brag about their golden goose? I shouldn't have been surprised. They had been doing it my whole life. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in the family. My father had a construction company, my uncle was a mechanic, my grandfather had been a factory worker. Men who built things with their own hands. Real work. And then there was me, the kid who spent too much time with computers. Get off those screens. My father used to growl when I was 16 and working on my first programming project. No one's going to pay you to sit and push buttons all day. Even when I landed my first remote IT job, making more money at 22 than he had in his prime, he scoffed. Unbelievable, he muttered at a family gathering. Companies these days throw money at anything. My mother wasn't any better. Oh, I just worry about you. She'd sigh in front of her friends. All those hours alone in front of a screen. It's not normal. You should go out into the real world, meet real people. Years of belittling my work, my success, yet they never had a problem spending my money. And now, standing in the middle of this villa, my villa, watching them bathe in luxury, they were doing it again. You know, my father continued, oblivious to my expression. I was just telling them how absurd it is that people actually pay you for this stuff. I inhaled deeply through my nose. What stuff? You know, he smirked condescendingly. Spending all day sitting around staring at lines of code. It's not like you're building anything real. One of his friends laughed. Man, if I had a job like that, I'd work 2 hours a day and spend the rest golfing. Right. My father grinned. Hell, even a monkey could learn to do that. That was it. I pulled out my phone, slowly exhaling. Booking confirmation. And then I saw it. A new invoice from Exclusive Villas Spain. Total cost. 52,000 euros. 10 times the original price. A chill ran down my spine. I could afford it, but that wasn't the point. The point was this had gone too far. I looked up at my parents, still laughing, oblivious. I typed a single message. Send. They wouldn't realize their mistake until it was too late. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and waited. First, nothing changed. The guests continued drinking, my mother continued laughing. My father continued making jokes at my expense. Then, less than a minute later, my mother's phone vibrated. She picked it up reluctantly, wine glass still in hand, but the moment her eyes scanned the screen, her smile froze. Then her face drained of all color. My father noticed. What's wrong? She opened her mouth but no words came out. Instead, she handed him the phone, fingers trembling. He took it, frowning. As he read the message, his expression shifted. What is this? His voice lost all trace of amusement. I let the silence stretch between us before calmly replying. That, I said, is the new invoice. He blinked. New. The villa. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Has an occupancy limit of 6 people. We are now 18. I gestured to the crowd around us. And luxury villas charge extra for additional guests. My father's fingers tightened around the phone. How much extra? I smiled. 10 times the original cost. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then my uncle started to laugh. Oh, come on, this has got to be a joke. He clapped my father on the shoulder. He's messing with you. My mother looked at me desperately. Tell me you didn't approve this. I tilted my head. I didn't approve anything. I just paid for what was used. It's over 500,000 euros. My father's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was just a button-pushing monkey who didn't do real work. Shouldn't be a problem for me, right? My mother flinched. One of the guests coughed. Maybe we should. Sit down. My father's voice was a sharp growl. Some of them shifted uncomfortably, but they obeyed. My mother's voice dropped to a saccharine whisper. Honey, listen, I know this is a lot, but let's be reasonable. We're family. Oh, now we're family. I let out a dry laugh. How curious. Because 5 minutes ago, I was just an embarrassment to the family name. She exhaled sharply, then turned to my father. Maybe we can talk to them, explain the mistake, get them to reduce the charge. I shrugged. You can try. My father shot me a furious glare before storming off towards the terrace, pulling out his phone. From inside, I could hear his voice rising as he demanded to speak to the property manager. My mother turned to me, eyes wide, trying to mask her panic. Honey, be reasonable. You know we didn't mean anything by those jokes, really? I raised an eyebrow. Because you've been telling me the same thing for years. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You know what's funny? You've spent my entire life mocking my work, but when it came time to book this trip, when you wanted luxury, comfort, expensive food, drinks, and private beaches, suddenly my money was good enough. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I shook my head and looked around. The guests were completely silent. All of you came here expecting a free ride. I don't know if my parents told you they'd cover everything, or if you just assumed it. I let out a dry chuckle. Either way, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. The front door burst open. My father marched in, his face red with rage. They're not reversing the charges, he growled. They said we should have read the policy. Oh, you should have, I agreed. Because I did. His eyes bored into mine. You knew. I smiled. Of course I knew. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And you let this happen? I shrugged. You let it happen. I gestured around. I planned a trip for 3 people. You invited 12 more. You assumed I would pay for everything. As always. His jaw tightened. So now what? You're just going to let them charge us this? Not exactly, I said, pulling out my phone again. I already made other arrangements. My mother's voice turned shrill. What do you mean? I tapped the screen twice. Send. Check your email. She did, and then I watched as her face crumbled. She turned to my father, horrified. He canceled our booking. My father snatched the phone from her hands, his eyes scanning the email in disbelief. It says here we have to vacate the villa by noon tomorrow. That's right. Pocketed my phone. I rebooked it. For me. My mother's face contorted. You wouldn't. I would. A nervous laugh escaped my lips. But where are we supposed to go? All the hotels around here are booked. Sounds like your problem. My father's hands clenched into fists. You think this is funny? Leaving your own family stranded. I held his gaze unflinching. You abandoned me years ago. Silence. There was no more laughter, no more mocking. Just the slow, painful realization that they had gone too far. For the first time, I was in control. I grabbed a glass of whiskey from the table, my whiskey, and took a slow sip. Then I turned to my parents, my voice calm, my message clear. You should start packing. The clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. It had taken exactly 4 minutes to turn their dream vacation into an absolute nightmare. Outside, the waves crashed gently against the shore. But inside the villa, There was nothing but a heavy, uncomfortable silence. The guests sat frozen, wine glasses in hand, caught in the crossfire of their own laughter. My mother was pale, my father stood rigid by the door, his hands balled into fists. This is a joke, right? My uncle let out a weak laugh, looking around for confirmation. I took a slow sip of my whiskey. Victory tasted smooth. My father's eyes narrowed. For the first time in his life, I think he realized I wasn't just the golden ATM he had raised. Son, be reasonable. We're your family. How could you do this to us? Oh, now I'm the bad guy? I raised an eyebrow. You didn't think about me when you filled my villa with freeloaders. But it's just money. My mother cried, desperation seeping into her voice. You're rich. What's the big deal? There it was. Even now they didn't get it. Oh, it's just money. I let out a cold laugh. Fine. If money's no problem, pay it yourself. I pulled out my phone, opened the invoice and held it up for all to see. Let's see, 52,000 euros. Now, since everyone here is living the high life, let's split the bill. I turned to the guests and gestured. That's about 4,000 euros per person. Should be easy, right? My father's face hardened. My mother nearly dropped her wine glass. You heard him. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I could see it now. They didn't have the money. Fine Ishragd. If you can't pay, start packing. You can't just kick us out like this. My mother gasped. I tilted my head. Why not? The villa manager confirmed I rebooked it. It belongs to me. For the next 3 weeks. My father's face grew redder and redder. You knew? He asked slowly, his voice dangerously low. I gave him a lazy smile. Of course. He stared at me like I was a stranger. And you let this happen? You let it happen. I gestured around. I booked a vacation for 3 people. You brought a dozen more. You assumed I would pay for everything. And now what are we supposed to do? My mother whined. All the hotels are booked. Not my problem. My father's hands clenched into fists. You think this is funny? Leaving your own family stranded. I held his gaze impassive. You abandoned me years ago. Silence. There was no more mocking, no more joking, just the slow, inevitable understanding that they had crossed the line. I took another sip of my whiskey, savoring the moment. You should start packing. By midnight, the villa was in total chaos. This is insane. We're not going to find a hotel at this hour. How are we supposed to get home? They ran around like headless chickens, making frantic phone calls, desperately searching for available rooms. I simply sat back and enjoyed the show. One by one, the guests began to leave, dragging their luggage behind them. My uncle, his face twisted with rage, turned to me at the door. How are we supposed to get back? I gave him the same nonchalant shrug he had given me earlier when he was laughing at my job. You didn't ask me when you came. Why should I care how you leave? He muttered a string of curses under his breath and disappeared into the night. And then finally it was just my parents and me. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My father stood rigid by the door, his hands clenched into fists. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and menacing. I smiled. Maybe. But not tonight. And with that, I closed the door in their faces. The door clicked shut with a satisfying finality. For the first time since I arrived, silence filled the villa. No mocking laughter, no condescending voices, no demands from people who felt entitled to everything. Just me. Alone. And I had never felt better. I walked back to the bar, poured myself another drink, and stepped out onto the balcony. Down below, my parents stood at the entrance, their luggage at their feet. My mother paced back and forth, frantically typing on her phone. My father stood rigid, staring out at the ocean. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. They were trapped. No hotels, no free rooms, no easy way to get home. I let out a slow breath. For years I had let them walk all over me. I had funded their spending, endured their condescension, ignored their mocking. And they had never, not once, thanked me or treated me as anything more than a walking ATM. But tonight they had no one else to lean on. For the first time in their lives, they would have to face the consequences. Alone. I took a sip of whiskey, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Then my phone buzzed. Mother. I let it ring. Then another call and another. 5 missed calls. 6. And then bam bam bam. The pounding on the villa door was so loud it rattled the walls. "Open this door right now," my father roared. I took another sip of my drink. "Ungrateful? Careful," I warned, my voice calm. "You're in no position to insult me. This isn't funny." My mother sobbed. "We have nowhere to go." I sighed. Here we go. The cycle. The same pattern I had grown up with. First the anger, then the guilt. And if that didn't work, the manipulation. "Honey," my mother's voice softened immediately, switching tactics. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents." I let out a dry laugh. "Oh, here comes the best part. Please," she begged. "We made a mistake. We agree. But don't punish us like this. You're not a cruel person." "No, I'm not," I agreed. "But I'm also not a fool." Silence. I stepped closer to the door, leaning against it. "Let me guess. If I let you in, everything will go back to normal. You'll say it was a misunderstanding, and by next week, I'll be paying for something else you can't afford. That's not fair." Neither was inviting half the town to my vacation. They were just friends who were drinking my whiskey, eating my food, and laughing at my job. More silence. I smiled. I had them cornered. "Here's the thing, mother, father." I exhaled, my voice firm. "I don't care if you made a mistake. You don't respect me. You never have." My father scoffed. "Oh, please. The drama." "Drama?" My voice hardened. "Tell me, father, is it drama when you laugh at my job in front of your friends? When you treat me like a joke while spending the money I earn? Is it drama when you expect me to pay for your lives without a second thought?" "Not once." Silence. I continued, my voice sharp as a knife. "The only time I matter to you is when I hand over my credit card. The rest of the time, I'm nothing more than a disappointment." "That's not true." "Yes, it is. And tonight, you're going to experience the consequences of treating me like a bank instead of a son." I heard my mother sob. "Please don't do this." I shook my head, a cold smile forming on my lips. "Good night." And then I walked away. The last desperate attempt. I should have expected it. At 6 a.m. my phone buzzed again. A text. "Father, we're going home today. But this isn't over." I let out a slow breath as I swiped through the messages. "Mother, you've hurt us deeply. We raised you, gave you everything, and this is how you treat us? Father, don't forget where you came from. Mother, we're still your parents. Someday you'll regret this." It was so predictable it almost made me laugh. First the anger, then the guilt, and finally one last attempt to regain control. But this time I wasn't playing their game. I silenced my phone, left it on the nightstand, and stretched. The villa was quiet now, peaceful. For the first time in years I had finally set boundaries, and it felt incredible. I thought it was over. That morning I sat on the villa terrace drinking my coffee, staring at the empty driveway where my parents had stood the night before. The air smelled of salt and victory. I should have felt guilty. I didn't. For the first time in years I had drawn a line, set a boundary, and this time they had no choice but to respect it. Or so I thought. At noon my phone buzzed again. "Mother, we just got home. Let's talk when you're ready." I ignored it. "Father, you humiliated us in front of our friends. After everything we've done for you." I ignored that one too. For the next 2 days the messages kept coming. Some were pleas, others thinly veiled threats. "Mother, honey, families don't do this to each other. Father, if you want to cut us off, fine. But don't expect us to be there when you need help. Mother, just call us. Let's fix this before it gets worse." And then at 8:36 a.m. on the third day, I got a call from my boss. "Hey," he said, his voice hesitant. "Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. Your parents called our office this morning." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me." "Yeah, they said they were worried about your mental health. That you've been acting irrationally, making impulsive financial decisions. Wanted to know if everything was okay at work." I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell over. "This has got to be a joke." "It's not," my boss sighed. "Look, I told them we don't discuss our employees' private matters, but maybe you should handle this before it gets out of control." My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. They had crossed the line. I expected manipulation. I expected them to try to guilt trip me. But this was a direct attack on my career. I took a deep breath, opened my phone and typed me, "You've crossed the line. Do not call my work again. Mother. We were just worried about you." Me. You weren't trying to destroy my job because I stopped paying for your lives. This is the last time I'm talking to you. Father. Don't be dramatic. Me. Watch. And then I blocked them. Their numbers, their emails, their social media accounts. For the first time in my life, I cut them off completely. A month later, at first it was strange. For years, my life had been dictated by their needs. My finances, my time, my energy, all of it had gone towards making their lives easier. Now there was silence. No messages, no sudden financial emergencies, no emotional manipulations. Just me living for myself. I moved to a different city, a different apartment. A fresh start. I threw myself into my work, picked up hobbies I had abandoned. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next call asking for money. It felt liberating. Until the inevitable happened. The last message. 2 months after I had blocked them, I received an email. From my mother. I almost deleted it without reading it. But something made me hesitate. I opened it. Subject. I'm sorry. The message was short. I don't know if you'll ever talk to us again. I don't blame you. But I want you to know I regret everything. We weren't wrong. I was wrong. And now I finally understand. We took you for granted. We thought you'd always be there. And now we've lost you. Your father won't admit it, but he knows it too. He just doesn't know how to say it. I don't expect you to forgive us. I just hope that someday you can look back and remember us as something more than what we became. No matter what, we love you. That was it. No request for money. No attempt at manipulation. Just surrender. I stared at the screen for a long time, and then I closed the email. I didn't reply. Not because I hated them. Not because I wanted revenge. But because for the first time in my life I finally understood something. Love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Family doesn't mean financial servitude. And sometimes walking away is the only way to be free.